An infertile millionaire took two homeless little girls to his ex-fiancee's wedding. Everyone laughed, but before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Richard Montgomery stood frozen in his home office, the cream-colored envelope trembling slightly in his hand. The embossed golden letters caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, almost mocking him with their elegance. Elizabeth Carter and William Harrington request the honor of your presence. Richard's jaw tightened as he read the invitation again. Elizabeth, the woman who had promised to spend her life with him, who had looked into his eyes and said, "Forever," only to walk away when forever didn't include children. "You can't give me what I want most in life," she had said that rainy night 2 years ago, twisting the engagement ring off her finger and placing it on his coffee table with a finality that still echoed in his nightmares. Now here she was, inviting him to witness her marrying someone else. Someone who could presumably give her the family she so desperately wanted. "I can't believe she had the audacity," Richard muttered, tossing the invitation onto his mahogany desk. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, the familiar ache of rejection blooming in his chest once more. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his business partner and oldest friend. "Did you get it?" Marcus asked without preamble. "The wedding invitation?" "Yes," Richard replied, his voice deliberately steady. "Straight to the recycling bin where it belongs." "You should go," Marcus said, surprising him. Richard scoffed. "And why would I subject myself to that particular form of torture? To show her you've moved on, that her rejection didn't destroy you." But it did, Richard thought, though he'd never admit it aloud. Instead, he simply said, "I'm not interested in playing games, Marcus." "It's not a game, Richard. It's closure. Besides," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a lighter tone, "wouldn't it be satisfying to show up looking spectacular, successful, and completely over her?" After they hung up, Richard stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the Seattle skyline as the sun began to set. His reflection stared back at him, a successful man by every measurable standard. At 45, he had built Montgomery Innovations into one of the leading technology companies in the Pacific Northwest. He had wealth, influence, respect, and he was completely alone. The doctors had delivered the news when he was 30. A childhood illness had left him unable to father children. He'd made peace with it, or so he thought, until Elizabeth made it clear that his condition was a deal-breaker. Richard picked up the invitation again, his mind wandering to the +1 option. If he did go, and that was still a big if, who would he bring? The thought of facing Elizabeth alone was unbearable, but the idea of bringing some random date felt equally pathetic. As he slipped the invitation into his desk drawer, a strange determination took hold of him. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it was time to show Elizabeth that he had survived her rejection, that he had found happiness despite what she had taken from him. But how? The question lingered in his mind as he poured himself a glass of scotch and stepped out onto his penthouse terrace. The cool evening air brushed against his face as the city lights began to twinkle below. "I'm not going to let her win," he whispered to the night sky. Not this time. What Richard couldn't possibly know as he made that promise to himself was that fate was about to intervene in the most unexpected way, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and what it truly meant to belong. 2 days later, Richard was still wrestling with the wedding invitation dilemma as he left a late business dinner. Rain pelted the Seattle streets and he hurried toward the parking garage, distracted by thoughts of Elizabeth. He almost missed them. 2 small figures huddled beneath a store awning across the street. Something made him pause and look closer. They were children. 2 girls, one perhaps 10 and the other no more than 6, pressed together under a tattered blanket. The older one had her arm protectively around the smaller child, whose head rested against her shoulder. Richard stood transfixed, rain soaking through his expensive coat. What were 2 young children doing alone on the streets at this hour? As if sensing his gaze, the older girl looked up. Even from a distance, her eyes reflected a fierce protectiveness that struck him to His core. Before he could think it through, Richard crossed the street. "Are you two okay?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. The older girl straightened, suspicion evident in her posture. "We're fine," she answered curtly, her voice steadier than expected. "You shouldn't be out here alone. It's late, and this rain is getting worse." Richard gestured to the restaurant behind him. "At least let me buy you some dinner." "We don't need charity," the older girl replied, but the younger one peeked out from under the blanket, her eyes wide. "It's not charity," Richard said gently. "Just one human helping another." The older girl seemed to consider this. "I'm Lily," she finally said. "This is my sister, Emma." Emma offered a tiny wave, revealing a worn teddy bear clutched in her other hand. "I'm Richard. There's a diner around the corner that makes great hot chocolate." 20 minutes later, Richard watched in silence as the girls devoured their food. Beneath the harsh diner lights, he could see them clearly for the first time. Their clothes were worn but clean, their faces smudged but not unhealthy. They ate with surprising manners, napkins on laps, quiet thank yous to the waitress. "Where are your parents?" Richard finally asked. Lily's eyes flashed with practiced caution. "They're gone. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" A slight hesitation. "We manage." Richard nodded, not pushing further. Something about these girls tugged at him. Their dignity amid hardship, their obvious bond. Then, a wild thought struck him. So absurd he almost laughed aloud, could he? No, it was insane. Yet looking at these two abandoned children, he couldn't help but see a parallel to his own abandonment by Elizabeth. "I have a proposition," he heard himself saying. "I need to attend an important event this weekend, a wedding. I could use some company." Lily's eyes narrowed. "What kind of company?" "The respectable kind," Richard clarified quickly. "I just mean I have this big house. You both need a safe place. Maybe we could help each other." "For how long?" Lily asked, her protective instincts clearly on high alert. "Just the weekend," Richard said. "No strings attached, you can leave any time." Emma whispered something to her sister. Lily listened, then turned back to Richard. "We'll think about it." Richard wrote his phone number on a napkin. "Call this number if you decide yes, day or night." As he walked back to his car, Richard wondered what had possessed him. Taking two street children to Elizabeth's wedding? It was madness, yet somehow, it felt right. Richard's doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. the following morning. He hadn't slept well, convinced the girls would never call. But at 7:30, his phone had lit up with a message from a payphone. "Will come. Address, please." He opened the door to find Lily and Emma standing rigidly on his doorstep, small backpacks clutched in their hands. They looked even smaller in the daylight, with Lily's resolute stance contrasting sharply with Emma's wide-eyed curiosity. "You came," Richard said, unable to hide his surprise. "We discussed it," Lily replied, her voice careful and measured. "Emma thinks we should trust you." For now. Richard stepped aside to let them enter. "Welcome to my home." The girls' eyes widened as they took in the spacious penthouse with its panoramic city views. Emma gasped softly, while Lily maintained her guarded expression, though Richard caught a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, in her eyes. "You live here alone?" Lily asked, scanning the pristine, minimalist space. "I do," Richard replied. "There's plenty of room. Let me show you where you'll stay." He led them down the hallway to a guest suite with 2 beds. Emma immediately bounced onto one while Lily remained in the doorway, assessing. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked bluntly. Richard considered his answer carefully. "The truth? I received an invitation to my ex-fiance's wedding. She left me because I can't have children. You thought parading 2 orphans around would make her jealous," Lily finished, her voice sharp. Richard flinched. Put that way, his plan sounded callous and manipulative. "That was my initial thought," he admitted. "But now that you're here, it seems wrong." Something in his honest admission seemed to soften Lily's guard slightly. "We should get ready," she said. "Emma needs a bath." 2 hours later, Richard arranged for a stylist to visit his penthouse. As the woman took measurements and showed fabric samples, he was struck by how naturally the girls participated. Emma giggled as the stylist measured her, while Lily discussed color preferences with unexpected sophistication. "Navy blue would complement Emma's eyes," Lily suggested. "And perhaps something in emerald for me?" The stylist nodded approvingly. "You have excellent taste, young lady." Richard watched this exchange with growing curiosity. These were not ordinary street children. Their manners, their speech patterns, the way they carried themselves, everything hinted at a background far removed from homelessness. Later, as they ate lunch, Richard gently probed. "Lily, where did you learn about color coordination?" A flash of alarm crossed her face before she composed herself. "Books," she answered vaguely. "The library lets anyone read for free." When the new clothes arrived that afternoon, the transformation was striking. Dressed in a simple but elegant emerald dress, Lily looked like any affluent child from Richard's social circle. Emma, in her navy blue dress with white trim, was absolutely adorable. "You both look wonderful," Richard said, genuine warmth in his voice. Emma beamed, but Lily's response caught him off guard. "We know how to play our parts, Mr. Montgomery," she said quietly. "Just remember, this is temporary." As Richard watched them examine their reflections in the hallway mirror, he wondered what secrets these mysterious girls were hiding, and why, despite his better judgment, he felt increasingly protective of them both. The day of the wedding arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the penthouse windows. Richard adjusted his tie, checking his reflection one last time. The past 2 days with Lily and Emma had been surprisingly pleasant. Despite Lily's continued wariness, the girls had adapted to his home with remarkable ease. "Mr. Montgomery," Emma's small voice called from the doorway. "Are we leaving soon?" Richard turned and felt his breath catch. Emma stood there in her navy dress, her hair arranged in perfect ringlets adorned with a simple ribbon. She had a natural grace that defied her young age. "You look beautiful, Emma," he said sincerely. She smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "Lily helped me. She's really good at hair things." As if on cue, Lily appeared behind her sister. The emerald dress complemented her auburn hair, which was swept into an elegant half-updo. She looked poised, collected, and far older than her years. "We're ready," she stated simply, though Richard detected a slight nervousness in her voice. "Remember our agreement," she added. "We play our parts, attend this wedding, and then you help us with—" "I remember," Richard interrupted, aware of Emma listening intently. The sisters had finally revealed what they wanted in exchange: help finding a distant relative they claimed might take them in. "And I keep my promises." The drive to the Harrington estate was quiet. Through the rearview mirror, Richard watched, the girls taking in the manicured landscapes of Seattle's wealthiest district. Emma pointed excitedly at fountains and gardens, while Lily observed everything with calculating eyes. "Why did your fiancé leave you?" Emma asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Richard nearly swerved. "Emma!" Lily scolded. "It's all right," Richard said, gathering his thoughts. "Elizabeth wanted children. I can't have any. Sometimes people want different things from life." "That's sad," Emma declared. "You'd be a nice daddy." Her innocent comment struck Richard deeply. Before he could respond, they arrived at their destination, an imposing mansion with sprawling grounds decorated for a lavish wedding. "Wow," Emma whispered as they approached the entrance, where guests in designer outfits mingled on a red carpet, while photographers captured every arrival. Richard felt a moment of panic. What had he been thinking, bringing 2 children into the situation? But when he looked down at the girls, he was stunned by their transformation. Lily stood tall, her posture perfect, while Emma smiled sweetly, holding her sister's hand. "Ready?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Remember, we're your nieces visiting from Boston. Our parents are traveling abroad." Richard hadn't suggested this cover story. Lily had crafted it herself. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Richard guided the girls forward, one hand gently on each of their shoulders. Then he saw her, Elizabeth, speaking with guests near the entrance. She was radiant in her pre-ceremony outfit, her blonde hair styled elegantly. When she spotted Richard, her smile faltered momentarily. Her eyes moved to the girls, confusion evident. Then she excused herself and approached them. "Richard," she said, her voice controlled. "I didn't expect you to come." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied smoothly. Elizabeth's gaze lingered on Lily and Emma. "And who are these lovely young ladies?" Before Richard could answer, Lily stepped forward with perfect poise. "I'm Lily, and this is my sister Emma," she said, her voice clear and confident. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Carter. Your venue is absolutely exquisite." Elizabeth blinked, clearly taken aback by Lily's sophisticated response. "Thank you," she managed, her eyes darting questioningly to Richard. Emma tugged at Elizabeth's dress. "Your flowers are pretty. Are those peonies? My mommy loved peonies." Elizabeth's expression shifted from confusion to something harder. "How? Charming," she said, her tone suggesting otherwise. "Richard, I didn't realize you had such young friends." "There's a lot you don't know about me now, Elizabeth," Richard replied, feeling an unexpected surge of pride as he stood beside the two girls. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements, exuding wealth and elegance from every corner. As Richard guided Lily and Emma through the crowd, murmurs followed them like persistent shadows. "Who are those children? Did Montgomery adopt? I thought he couldn't have children." Richard felt a protective instinct rise as they navigated the sea of curious stares. Emma clutched his hand tightly while Lily walked beside them with remarkable composure, her eyes observing everything with quiet intensity. "Richard Montgomery," a booming voice called out. Gregory Winters, Elizabeth's uncle and one of Boston's most influential bankers, approached with a champagne flute in hand. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming, Gregory." Richard nodded politely. "Wouldn't miss it." Gregory's gaze shifted to the girls. "And who might these young ladies be?" Before Richard could respond, Lily stepped forward with a graceful smile. "I'm Lily, sir, and this is my sister Emma. It's a pleasure to meet you." Gregory's bushy eyebrows rose at her articulate introduction. "Well, aren't you well-spoken?" His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face. "You know, you remind me of someone." Lily's smile remained fixed, but Richard noticed her shoulders tense. "I have one of those faces, I suppose." Gregory murmured, unconvinced. "And how do you know Richard?" "They're my guests," Richard interjected smoothly. "That's all that matters." Emma, who had been quietly observing, suddenly pointed at the string quartet in the corner. "They're playing Vivaldi's Four Seasons, spring movement, right?" Her small face lit up. "Mommy used to play that on the piano." Gregory's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. "You know your classical music, young lady?" Lily squeezed, her sister's hand in warning, but the damage was done. Gregory's interest was piqued. "Montgomery," he said, lowering his voice. "Where did these children really come from?" Richard felt a flash of irritation. "Does it matter? Now, if you'll excuse us." As they moved away, Richard sensed Elizabeth watching from across the room, her eyes following them with growing suspicion. He leaned down to Lily's level. "Is everything okay?" Lily's composed facade briefly slipped. "We shouldn't have come. People are asking too many questions." "We'll be fine," Richard assured her, though he was beginning to wonder himself. What exactly were the girls hiding? They found their table, elegantly set with name cards and elaborate centerpieces. As they sat down, Elizabeth appeared, accompanied by her soon-to-be husband, William Harrington. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the confident air of old money. "Richard," Elizabeth said, her voice artificially warm. I wanted to properly introduce you to William. The two men exchanged tense handshakes. And these must be the little girls everyone's talking about, William remarked, his tone condescending as he looked down at Lily and Emma. Emma smiled innocently. Your wedding is very pretty, but Lily says it's XXXtrove. Extravagant, Lily supplied, then added with perfect innocence, almost as if someone needs to prove something. William's smile tightened while Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. Richard, Elizabeth hissed, dropping all pretense of cordiality. A word. In private. She led him to a quiet alcove away from the guests. What game are you playing? She demanded. Showing up with children? Are they even yours? Would it matter if they were? Richard countered. Elizabeth's eyes flashed. Don't think. I don't know what you're doing. Those girls obviously come from money, their manners, their knowledge. They're not some random children. Richard felt a chill. Elizabeth had noticed it too. I'm watching you, Richard, she warned. If there's something illegal about your arrangement with those girls, I'll find out. As she stalked away, Richard glanced back at their table. Lily was watching him intently, a knowing look in her eyes that suggested she understood exactly what had just transpired. And suddenly Richard realized he might have gotten himself into something far more complicated than he'd anticipated. The wedding ceremony proceeded with picture-perfect precision, though Richard barely noticed the vows exchanged. His mind kept drifting to Elizabeth's accusatory words and the mystery surrounding his young companions. During the elaborate dinner that followed, Richard observed as Lily and Emma navigated the formal place settings with practiced ease. Emma knew exactly which fork to use for each course, while Lily engaged in polite conversation with the elderly couple seated across from them. My granddaughter is about your age, the woman told Lily. Do you attend Westlake Academy? Most of the families here send their children there. We've been homeschooled, Lily replied smoothly. Our education has been unconventional. The woman nodded approvingly. Well, your parents have done an excellent job. You're remarkably well-spoken. Emma, who had been quiet, suddenly perked, up at the sound of the orchestra beginning a new piece. Lily, it's Tchaikovsky. Remember when we saw the Nutcracker? Lily's expression flickered with alarm before she composed herself. Yes, Emma. That was a long time ago. Richard caught the slip, another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with children who supposedly lived on the streets. As dinner concluded, a distinguished man in his 60s approached their table. His silver hair and tailored suit exuded authority, and the room seemed to quieten as he passed. Judge Harrison, Richard greeted him, standing respectfully. Montgomery, the judge nodded. Didn't expect to see you here. Elizabeth's choice was unexpected. His eyes drifted to the girls. And who might these young ladies be? Before Richard could answer, the judge's eyes widened slightly as he focused on Lily. My word, he murmured. You remind me of Victoria Blackwood. The resemblance is remarkable. Lily paled visibly. Emma looked up at her sister, confusion crossing her small face. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Lily said, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. Judge Harrison studied her face intently. Perhaps, though I rarely forget a face, especially one from such a high-profile case. He nodded politely before moving on, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Who's Victoria Blackwood? Richard asked quietly. Nobody, Lily replied too quickly. He's confused. The orchestra began playing a waltz and guests moved to the dance floor. Richard, sensing Lily needed a distraction, stood and offered his hand. May I have this dance? To his surprise, she accepted, following him to the edge of the dance floor. Richard awkwardly placed his hands in the proper position, realizing he hadn't considered that Lily might not know how to waltz. His concern proved unnecessary. Lily followed his lead perfectly, her movements graceful and practiced. You dance like someone who's had lessons, Richard observed carefully. Lily's eyes met his, calculating. Maybe I'm just a fast learner. And your sister knows classical music and formal dining etiquette, Richard continued softly. Lily, you can trust me. Who are you, really? For a moment, vulnerability flashed across her face. Then her walls came back up. We're nobody, Mr. Montgomery, just two girls trying to survive. Across the room, Elizabeth watched them dance, her expression darkening. She whispered something to William, who nodded and discreetly left the ballroom, phone in hand. As the music ended, Richard noticed Emma sitting alone at their table, looking unusually subdued. "What's wrong?" he asked, crouching beside her. "I miss home," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Our real home. Before everything got broken," Lily quickly intervened. "Emma, remember what we talked about? Some things we keep private." Richard looked between the sisters, the pieces slowly coming together. These weren't just homeless children. They were running from something, or someone, and now he realized with growing concern, his impulsive decision might have put them all in danger. The evening progressed with dancing and champagne flowing freely. Richard found himself increasingly drawn to the mystery of Lily and Emma, but also genuinely enjoying their company. Emma had brightened up again, her momentary sadness replaced by childlike wonder at the splendor around them. "Mr. Montgomery," Emma said, tugging his sleeve as they stood near the dessert table. "Can we try the chocolate fountain?" Richard smiled. "Of course, and you can call me Richard." Emma beamed. "Richard," she tested the name carefully. "That was my daddy's middle name." This small revelation, the first voluntary piece of information about their past, felt significant. As Richard helped Emma navigate the chocolate fountain, careful not to drip on her dress, he noticed Lily watching them with a complex expression, part wariness, part longing. "She likes you," came a voice beside him. Richard turned to find Elizabeth, her wedding gown shimmering under the ballroom lights. "Emma is a sweet child," Richard replied cautiously. "That's not what I meant." Elizabeth's voice was sharp. "The older one. She looks at you like she's searching for something." Her eyes narrowed. "I've been asking around, Richard. No one knows these girls. They appeared out of nowhere, just like in those tragic news stories about child trafficking." Richard felt a surge of anger. "That's a serious accusation, Elizabeth." "Is it?" She raised an eyebrow. "William has contacts in child services. One call and is there a problem?" Lily appeared beside them, her young face set in a surprisingly formidable expression. Elizabeth faltered momentarily, clearly not, expecting to be confronted by a child. "No problem at all, just catching up with an old friend." Lily's gaze was unwavering. It didn't look friendly. Elizabeth's smile tightened. "Perceptive little thing, aren't you? Tell me, where exactly are your parents?" "Elizabeth," Richard warned. "Our parents are gone," Lily stated flatly. "But that doesn't make us charity cases or victims." Elizabeth leaned down slightly. "You speak like someone much older than you appear. I wonder why that is." Before Lily could respond, the wedding planner approached, requesting Elizabeth's presence for the cake cutting. With one last suspicious glance, she departed. "She's dangerous," Lily said quietly, once Elizabeth was out of earshot. Richard nodded. "I'm beginning to see that." He hesitated, then added, "Lily, if you and Emma are in some kind of trouble." Lily's expression closed off. "We can handle ourselves." "You shouldn't have to," Richard said gently. "You're children." Something flashed in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or long-buried grief. "We stopped being children the day our parents died." The raw honesty of her statement stunned Richard into silence. Later, as the reception continued, Richard noticed Emma yawning. Finding a quiet corner with comfortable chairs, he sat with the girls away from the noise. Emma curled up beside him, her small head eventually drooping against his arm as she dozed off. "She trusts you," Lily observed, her voice softer than he'd heard before. "And you?" Richard asked. Lily considered this. "I'm getting there." They sat, in companionable silence, watching the celebration from a distance. Richard felt a strange contentment wash over him, one he hadn't experienced in years. Your ex-fiancée keeps looking over here, Lily noted. She's jealous. Richard glanced at Elizabeth, who indeed was watching them while pretending to listen to a guest. Not of me, he said. Of what she thinks we represent. A family, Lily whispered, almost to herself. The word hung between them, fragile and loaded with meaning. Richard looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully against him, then at Lily's guarded but softening expression, and felt something shift within his heart. This charade had begun as a way to save face at an uncomfortable event. Now, sitting here with these mysterious girls, Richard realized it had become something else entirely, something real and unexpectedly precious. As the wedding reception reached its peak, Richard noticed William weaving through the crowd toward Elizabeth. They conferred in hushed tones, with William showing her something on his phone. Elizabeth's eyes widened before darting across the room to where Richard sat with the girls. We should go, Richard said quietly to Lily, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. Lily followed his gaze and nodded, gently waking Emma. Time to leave, Em. As they stood to make their exit, Gregory Winters intercepted them, his earlier joviality replaced with a serious expression. Montgomery, a word, he said, leading Richard slightly away from the girls. I did some asking around. Gregory lowered his voice. Those children. There's a situation you might not be aware of. Richard's heart beat faster. What situation? The Blackwood case, Gregory said meaningfully. Surely you remember, Charles and Victoria Blackwood, the philanthropists who died in that terrible accident 2 years ago. The name clicked into place. Judge Harrison had mentioned it earlier. Richard vaguely recalled headlines about a wealthy couple killed in a yacht explosion but hadn't followed the story. What about them? Richard asked cautiously. They had 2 daughters, Gregory continued, eyeing Lily and Emma, who mysteriously disappeared from their grandparents' custody shortly after. There was speculation about foul play, inheritance disputes. Richard felt as though the floor were tilting beneath him. You think? I'm certain, Gregory whispered. That's Victoria Blackwood's face on that child. Same eyes, same bearing. The Blackwoods were prominent in Boston society. I met them several times. Richard glanced at Lily, who was watching them, intently while protectively holding Emma's hand. Why are you telling me this? Richard asked. Because... Gregory's expression grew grave. If those are the Blackwood girls, there are people looking for them. Powerful people. And Elizabeth's husband-to-be just made a phone call. Richard thanked Gregory quickly before returning to the girls. We're leaving. Now. They moved swiftly toward the exit, but Elizabeth stepped into their path. William, at her side. Leaving so soon? She asked, her voice saccharine. The authorities might want to have a word with you first. Lily's grip tightened on Emma's hand. William smirked, cell phone visible in his pocket. Whatever you think you know, Elizabeth, Richard said evenly. You're making a mistake. Am I? She challenged. The Blackwood girls have been missing for over a year. Their grandfather has offered a substantial reward for information on their whereabouts. Emma looked up at Lily, confusion and fear in her eyes. Lily? Richard felt a surge of protectiveness. We're leaving, he repeated firmly, placing himself between Elizabeth and the girls. The police are already on their way, William said smugly, along with a representative from the Blackwood family. Richard made a split-second decision. Bending down to Emma's level, he whispered, Do you trust me? She nodded without hesitation. Then follow me, he said, glancing at Lily, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. Richard led them toward the kitchen instead of the main exit. A server he'd slipped a $100 bill earlier held a service door open. They slipped through, emerging into a back parking area where Richard's car waited, keys already with the valet. As they drove away, Richard checked the rearview mirror. Emma looked frightened, but Lily's expression was one of resigned determination. Lily, Richard said gently, I think it's time you told me the whole truth. She stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her young face reflecting years of burden. We can't go back to your apartment. she said finally. They'll look there first. I know, Richard replied. I have a cabin, about 2 hours from here. Lily nodded, then turned to face him fully. The Blackwoods were our parents, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And our grandfather is the reason we're running. The following morning brought gray skies and gentle rain to the cabin nestled in the woods outside Seattle. Richard sat at the rustic kitchen table, 2 cups of hot chocolate steaming before him as he waited for the girls to wake. Last night, exhaustion had overcome them all. After arriving at the secluded cabin, Emma had fallen asleep almost immediately in one of the spare bedrooms. Lily, despite her obvious fatigue, had only reluctantly agreed to rest, extracting a promise from Richard that they would talk in the morning. The sound of small footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Emma appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her worn teddy bear. Good morning, Richard said gently. Hot chocolate? Emma nodded and climbed onto the chair. Is Lily still sleeping? I'm here, Lily answered, entering the kitchen with the wariness of someone much older. She looked at the mugs of hot chocolate, then at Richard. You want to know everything. Only what you're comfortable sharing, Richard replied, sliding a mug toward her. Emma looked between them, sensing the tension. Can I tell him about Mommy and Daddy Lily, please? Lily hesitated, then nodded slowly. Our daddy made buildings, Emma began, warming her hands around the mug. Tall ones with lots of glass. And Mommy played music and helped people. Charles and Victoria Blackwood, Richard supplied gently. Your father was an architect and your mother was a concert pianist who ran a children's arts foundation. Lily's eyes widened slightly. You've been researching. After we left the wedding, Richard admitted. I needed to understand. Lily seemed to make a decision. After our parents died, we went to live with our grandfather, Edmund Blackwood. He seemed kind at first, but then... She glanced at Emma, clearly measuring her words. He started changing our names, our appearances. He wouldn't let us talk about our parents. He was obsessed with controlling everything. He was mean, Emma interjected. He took away my teddy and said I was too old for toys. We discovered he was trying to gain control of our trust funds, Lily continued, her voice hardening. He needed guardianship to access the money our parents left us. One night I overheard him talking about sending us to separate boarding schools abroad. So you ran, Richard concluded. Lily nodded. We've been hiding for almost a year, staying in shelters, sometimes with kind strangers. We were doing okay until... A notification sound from Richard's phone interrupted her. He glanced at the screen and frowned. What is it? Lily asked, immediately alert. Richard turned the phone to show them. On the screen was a news article with the headline, Blackwood Heiresses Spotted at Harrington Carter Wedding, accompanied by a blurry photo of the girls. Elizabeth, Richard muttered. She must have tipped off the press. Lily's face paled. Everyone will be looking for us now. Before Richard could respond, another notification appeared. A text from Marcus. Turn on the news. Channel 8, now. Richard quickly found the remote and switched on the cabin's small television. Elizabeth's face filled the screen, standing outside the wedding venue in her wedding dress, wearing an expression of practiced concern. I was shocked to discover these poor children had been manipulated by my ex-fiancé, she was saying to a reporter. These vulnerable girls should be with their legal guardian, not used as pawns in some twisted revenge plot. The camera panned to show William beside her, nodding gravely. When I realized who they were, I immediately contacted authorities. The girl's grandfather has been worried sick. The scene changed to show an elderly, distinguished-looking man, Edmund Blackwood, his face a mask of grandfatherly concern. My granddaughters have been through so much trauma after losing their parents. They need professional help, stability. I'm offering a substantial reward for information leading to their safe return. Richard switched off the TV, his jaw tight with anger. They're painting me as a kidnapper. Emma's lower lip trembled. Are they going to take us away? Richard looked at the frightened child, then at Lily, whose eyes held a mix of fear and defiance. In that moment, he made a decision that would change all their lives. "No," he said firmly. "No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. I promise." Lily studied his face, searching for deception. "Why would you help us? You barely know us." Richard considered his answer carefully. "Because sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who stands beside you when everyone else has turned away." Rain battered the cabin windows as Richard made quiet phone calls in the corner, while the girls huddled on the sofa. Emma had fallen asleep against her sister, exhausted by the morning's revelations. Lily remained vigilant, her eyes never leaving Richard. "That was my lawyer," Richard said finally, returning to sit across from them. "And a private investigator, I trust. They're looking into your grandfather's activities and the legal status of your guardianship." Lily nodded, gently stroking Emma's hair. "He'll have the best lawyers. He always gets what he wants." "Not this time," Richard replied with quiet determination. "But I need to understand everything if I'm going to help you." Lily's eyes grew distant. "After our parents died, the first few weeks with grandfather seemed normal. As normal as it could be when you're grieving. But then he started changing things. Our schedules became rigid, our phones were taken away, we couldn't contact our friends." "Did he hurt you?" Richard asked carefully. "Not physically," Lily clarified. "But he..." She struggled to find the words. "He was erasing who we were, our memories, our parents' legacy. He even fired our nanny, who had been with us since I was born." "Why?" Richard pressed gently. "The money," Lily said simply. "Our parents left everything in trusts for Emma and me. Grandfather can't touch it without control of us." Her eyes hardened. "One night I heard him on the phone. He was talking about liquidating our father's company once he secured guardianship. Dad spent his life building that company." Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "I'm hungry." Richard smiled, welcoming the interruption. "I'll make some sandwiches." In the small kitchen, Richard prepared lunch while processing everything he'd learned. The Blackwood case was more complex than he'd realized. Charles Blackwood's architectural firm had been valued at over $100 million, and Victoria's family fortune added substantially to that. The girls weren't just running from an overbearing grandfather. They were fleeing someone who saw them as access to a fortune. As they ate, Emma seemed to relax, chattering about a squirrel she'd spotted outside the window. Lily remained guarded, but appeared less tense than earlier. "We need a plan," Richard said eventually. "Elizabeth has made this very public." "We can disappear again," Lily suggested. "We've done it before." "Is that the life you want for Emma?" Richard asked gently. "Always running, always hiding?" Lily's composure finally cracked. "What choice do we have? No one believed us before. The court took his side. He's Edmund Blackwood, respected businessman, philanthropist, grieving father, who just wants to care for his orphaned granddaughters." Bitterness laced her words. "I believe you," Richard said simply. Lily looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "And I think I can prove he's after your inheritance, not your welfare," Richard continued. "But we need to be smart about this. Going public now would put you at risk." "What are you suggesting?" Lily asked. "We gather evidence, build a case, and when the time is right, we fight back, legally and publicly." Richard leaned forward. "But first we need to address the kidnapping accusations." His phone rang. "Marcus calling." Richard answered, putting it on speaker. "You're in trouble, my friend," Marcus said without preamble. "Police are at your apartment right now with a search warrant. Elizabeth is playing this perfectly. The concerned ex who discovered missing children. She's painting you as obsessed and vengeful." "That's not true," Emma exclaimed indignantly. There was a pause before Marcus responded. "Is that one of the girls?" "Yes," Richard confirmed. "Marcus, they ran away from their grandfather for good reason. He's trying to gain control of their inheritance. That changes things," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Richard, I have an idea, but it's risky. Elizabeth is holding a press conference tomorrow about the missing Blackwood heiresses. If you showed up with the girls. Absolutely not, Lily interjected. We're not going anywhere near her. Richard considered this. Actually, Lily, that might be exactly what we need to do. Not to surrender, but to take control of the narrative. How? Lily asked skeptically. Richard met her gaze, determination in his eyes. By telling your story, your way, before anyone can silence you again. Night had fallen over the cabin. Emma slept peacefully in the bedroom while Richard and Lily sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by laptops, legal documents, and hastily scribbled notes. For the past few hours, they had been constructing their counterattack with Marcus joining them via video call. Elizabeth's press conference is scheduled for noon tomorrow at the Harrington Media Center, Marcus reported, his face serious on the screen. She's framing it as a plea for the safe return of the Blackwood girls. Your grandfather will be there too, Lily. Lily's jaw tightened. Of course he will. The Concerned Grandfather Act is his specialty. My contact at Child Services sent over some interesting information, Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. There were 3 separate reports filed by your former nanny expressing concerns about your grandfather's behavior after your parents died. All 3 were mysteriously dropped. Olivia tried to help us, Lily confirmed quietly. Grandfather made her disappear too. Marcus's eyebrows rose. Disappeared as in? No, Lily clarified quickly. He threatened her family's immigration status. She had to leave the country. Richard made a note. We need to find her. Her testimony would be invaluable. Already. On it, Marcus replied. My investigator is tracking her down in Costa Rica. Lily studied the battle plan they'd developed. You really think this will work? It's risky, Richard admitted. But having you and Emma speak directly to the public changes everything. The narrative stops being about a vengeful ex-fiancé and starts being about 2 children fighting for their rights. What if grandfather tries to take us right there? Lily asked, the worry evident in her young voice despite her attempts to appear strong. That's why we're arranging for Judge Catherine Winters to be present, Richard explained. She's Gregory's sister and has a reputation for being fiercely protective of children's interests. She's agreed to issue an emergency stay on any custody enforcement until a proper hearing can be conducted. Lily looked skeptical. Judges sided with grandfather before. They didn't have all the facts, Richard countered, and they hadn't seen this. He turned his laptop to show her an email from his investigator. Attached were financial documents showing substantial sums being transferred from Edmund Blackwood's accounts to offshore holdings shortly after he gained temporary guardianship. He's already moving money around, Lily whispered, anger flashing in her eyes. Our parents' money. Precisely, Richard said. And that's just the beginning. My team found a draft proposal to liquidate Blackwood Architects and sell off its assets to a developer in Dubai. Lily's hands trembled slightly. Dad loved that company. He built it from nothing. Richard reached across the table and gently covered her small hand with his. I know what it's like to have something precious taken away. I won't let that happen. To you and Emma. Lily didn't pull away, which Richard took as a significant sign of trust. There's one more thing. Marcus interjected. Elizabeth's press conference is a trap. She's expecting you to either stay hidden, making you look guilty, or show up alone to defend yourself, making you look desperate. She won't expect all 3 of us, Richard concluded. Exactly. And she certainly won't expect you to have evidence and legal representation ready. Marcus smiled grimly. The element of surprise is crucial. My car will pick you up at 11 a.m. Back entrance, no cameras. As the call ended, Richard noticed Lily stifling a yawn. You should get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow will be a challenging day. Lily hesitated. Richard? Yes? Why are you doing all this for us? Really? Her eyes searched his, looking for any sign of deception. Most adults want something in return. Richard considered his answer carefully. When I found out I couldn't have children of my own, I thought that part of my life was over. Then you and Emma came along, and He paused, emotion catching in his throat. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, but also because you've helped me remember what matters most. Lily studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Good night, Richard, she said quietly, and for the first time the wariness in her eyes was replaced with something that looked remarkably like hope. A light fog hung over Seattle as Richard's car pulled up to the service entrance of the Harrington Media Center. The glass and steel building loomed above them, its modern architecture creating an intimidating presence. Inside, Elizabeth would be preparing to deliver her carefully crafted narrative to the waiting press. Are you both ready? Richard asked, turning to look at Lily and Emma in the back seat. Emma, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, clutched her sister's hand. I'm scared, Lily, she whispered. Lily, wearing a conservative green dress that made her look both dignified and unmistakably young, squeezed her sister's hand reassuringly. Remember what we practiced, Em. Just tell the truth. The truth, Emma repeated, nodding solemnly. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. All set. Judge Winters is in position. Media fully assembled. Blackwood and Elizabeth on stage now. It's time, Richard said, his voice steady despite the tension knotting his stomach. They entered through the service door where Marcus was waiting, dressed impeccably in a dark suit. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of the girls, their transformation from the street children he'd heard about to poised young ladies clearly surprising him. The press conference has just started, he informed them, leading the way through the back corridors. Elizabeth is making her opening statement now. Your grandfather looks appropriately concerned for the cameras. Lily's face darkened at the mention of her grandfather. He's always been good at pretending. They reached a side entrance to the main conference room. Through the partially open door, they could see Elizabeth at the podium, her expression a perfect mask of concern as camera flashes illuminated her face. These vulnerable children need to be returned to their loving grandfather, Elizabeth was saying, her voice carrying through the speakers. My ex-fiancé, Richard Montgomery, in what can only be described as a disturbed attempt at revenge, has taken these girls from their rightful guardian. Edmund Blackwood stood nearby, his distinguished features arranged in an expression of grandfatherly worry. I just want my granddaughters back, he added when Elizabeth paused. They've been through so much already, losing their parents. Richard felt Lily tense beside him. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Remember, we control the narrative now. Questions? Elizabeth asked the assembled reporters. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Carter, how did you discover the identity of these children? Before Elizabeth could answer, Richard nodded to Marcus, who opened the door fully. Richard stepped into the conference room, Lily and Emma walking confidently on either side of him. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as cameras swiveled toward them. Perhaps, Richard said clearly, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. You should ask the children themselves. Elizabeth's perfect composure faltered, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Edmund Blackwood's face hardened, his eyes fixing on his granddaughters with an intensity that made Emma shrink, closer to Richard. Richard! Elizabeth recovered quickly, her voice sweet with false concern. I'm so glad you've brought the girls safely. Mr. Blackwood has been so worried. I'm sure he has, Richard replied evenly. Though perhaps not for the reasons he claims. Murmurs spread through the assembled reporters as they sensed the unexpected confrontation developing. Lily and Emma Blackwood have something they would like to say, Richard continued, guiding the girls toward the front of the room where a second microphone stood. Security personnel moved uncertainly, looking to Edmund Blackwood for direction. He gave a slight nod, clearly calculating that forcibly removing the children would look terrible on camera. Lily stepped to the microphone, her young face remarkably composed despite the flashing cameras. My name is Lily Blackwood. This is my sister, Emma. We are not missing and we have not been kidnapped. The room erupted in questions. Lily waited for the noise to subside before continuing. After our parents died, our grandfather changed. He isolated us, controlled every aspect of our lives, and began dismantling everything our parents built. Her clear voice never wavered. When we discovered he planned to separate us and sell our father's company, we ran away. We were living on the streets when Mr. Montgomery found us. Emma stepped forward, her small voice surprisingly strong in the microphone. Grandfather was mean. He took away our pictures of Mommy and Daddy. He said we couldn't talk about them anymore. Elizabeth attempted to retake control. These children have clearly been coached. They're confused and traumatized. I'm not confused, Lily interrupted, firmly. And we have evidence. Marcus stepped forward, distributing folders to key reporters in the front row. These documents show financial transactions made by Edmund Blackwood immediately after gaining temporary guardianship, diverting funds from the Blackwood family trusts to offshore accounts. A tall, dignified woman rose from her seat near the back. Judge Catherine Winters commanded attention without speaking a word. As a family court judge, she announced, I find these allegations deeply troubling. I am issuing an immediate stay on all custody arrangements pending a full investigation. Edmund Blackwood's face contorted with rage. This is preposterous. These are my granddaughters. Yes, we are, Lily replied, her voice steady as she looked directly at her grandfather. But we are also our parents' daughters, and we won't let you destroy what they built. The room exploded with questions as reporters rushed forward. Security formed a protective barrier around Richard and the girls. Through the chaos, Richard caught Elizabeth's eye. Her perfect facade had crumbled, replaced by cold fury as she realized her carefully orchestrated plan had backfired spectacularly. As they were escorted to a private room, Emma looked up at Richard, her small face serious. Did we do good? Richard knelt down to her level, his heart full of pride and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name. You did better than good, Emma. You were both incredibly brave. For the first time since he'd met them, Lily's guard completely dropped. She threw her arms around Richard's neck in a spontaneous hug. Thank you for believing us, she whispered, her voice finally sounding like that of the child she truly was. Over her shoulder, Richard could see reporters gathered around Judge Winters, who was speaking with firm authority. Edmund Blackwood was being questioned by two serious-looking men in suits that Richard recognized as investigators from the district attorney's office. The battle wasn't over yet, but the first crucial victory was theirs. The weeks following the press conference passed in a blur of legal meetings, court appearances, and adjustments to a new reality. Richard's penthouse, once a showcase of modern minimalism, had transformed dramatically. Emma's drawings now adorned the refrigerator, colorful chapter books filled the bookshelves, and a small piano stood in the corner of the living room. Richard sat at his desk reviewing paperwork when a tentative knock interrupted his thoughts. Lily stood in the doorway, her expression serious. The lawyers called, she said. Judge Winters made her decision. Richard nodded, gesturing for her to enter. I just got the email. And? Lily's voice betrayed her anxiety despite her attempt to appear composed. Your grandfather has been permanently removed as a guardian, Richard confirmed gently. The court has appointed an independent trustee to manage the Blackwood assets until you both come of age. Lily's shoulders sagged with relief. What about the company? Dad's company? Blackwood Architects remains intact, Richard assured her. In fact, Marcus and I have been speaking with your father's former partners. They want to preserve his legacy and vision. Lily nodded, absorbing this information. Over the past weeks, Richard had noticed her gradually allowing herself to act more like the child she was, though the protective instincts forged during their time on the streets remained. There's something else we need to discuss, Richard said carefully. The court needs to assign you a permanent guardian. Lily tensed immediately. They won't separate us, will they? They promised. No one is separating you and Emma, Richard interrupted gently, but decisions need to be made about your future. Before he could continue, Emma burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. Richard, I finished my piano practice. Want to hear? Richard smiled. Of course I do. Emma grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the living room where the small piano waited. Lily followed, her previous anxiety momentarily set aside. Emma positioned herself carefully on the bench, her small fingers poised above, the keys with determination. The melody that emerged was simple but played with heartfelt concentration. Für Elise, the piece Emma had once mentioned her mother taught her. When she finished, Richard applauded sincerely. "That was beautiful, Emma." "Mommy used to play it much better," Emma said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "But she said I was learning fast." "She'd be very proud of you," Richard said softly. Emma beamed at him before skipping off to find her drawing supplies, leaving Richard and Lily alone. "She's happy here," Lily observed quietly. "Are you?" Richard asked, turning to face her. Lily considered the question carefully. "I don't feel afraid anymore. That's new." "Lily," Richard began, choosing his words with care. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next, for all of us." "You want us to stay?" she stated simply. "Very much," Richard admitted. "These past weeks, having you both here, it's changed everything for me." Lily studied his face with the perceptiveness that had impressed him from their first meeting. "You never thought you'd have a family." "No," he agreed. "When I found out I couldn't have children, I thought that door was closed forever. And now I realize that family isn't always what you expect it to be." Richard's voice grew soft. "Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it." A small, genuine smile, still rare but becoming more frequent, spread across Lily's face. "Emma would like that. She already thinks of this as home." "And you?" Richard asked gently. Lily looked around the apartment, taking in the subtle changes that marked their presence. "I think," she began thoughtfully, "I think our parents would want us to be somewhere safe, with someone who cares about us, not just our inheritance." Richard felt his heart expand with a warmth he'd never experienced before. "I've filed preliminary paperwork for adoption," he said cautiously, "but only if that's what you both want." For a long moment, Lily was silent. Then, with the seriousness of someone making a monumental decision, she nodded. "I think we'd like that very much." From the hallway came Emma's voice, bright with excitement. "Can I call you Dad then?" Just as life settled into a comfortable rhythm, an unexpected letter arrived that threatened to disrupt everything. Richard stared at the official-looking envelope, a familiar dread pooling in his stomach. "What is it?" Marcus asked, noticing Richard's expression during their lunch meeting. "Catherine Newman is seeking custody of the girls," Richard replied, his voice tight. "She claims to be their mother's second cousin." Marcus frowned. "After 3 months? Convenient timing, now that the publicity has died down and their financial future is secure." "Exactly," Richard agreed grimly. "The hearing is scheduled for next week." That evening, Richard struggled with how to tell the girls. He found them in the living room, Lily helping Emma with her math homework. Their easy companionship, the way they'd transformed his sterile penthouse into a warm home, made the threat of losing them unbearable. "We need to talk," he said gently, sitting across from them. Lily immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" Richard explained the situation as carefully as possible, watching their faces for reactions. Emma's eyes filled with tears while Lily's expression hardened into the protective mask he hadn't seen in weeks. "She doesn't even know us," Emma whispered. "Why would she want us?" "Money," Lily answered bluntly. "Now that grandfather can't control the trusts, she wants to try." Richard nodded. "That's what my lawyer suspects too." Emma clutched her teddy bear tightly. "I don't want to go with her. I want to stay with you." "We should run," Lily suggested suddenly, her voice taking on an urgent quality that alarmed Richard. "Tonight. We did it before." "No," Richard interrupted firmly. "Running isn't the answer. We'll face this together. Legally." "But what if we lose?" Lily challenged, fear breaking through her composed facade. Richard knelt before her, gently taking her hands. "Lily, I promise you this. I will never stop fighting for you both. But I need you to trust me. Running now would only hurt our case. Lily studied his face intently, searching for any sign of deception. You really believe we can win? I do, Richard affirmed. Judge Winters knows your story. The evidence against your grandfather applies to anyone seeking control of your inheritance. What if, Emma began hesitantly, what if we tell them we choose you? Richard smiled softly. That matters a great deal, Emma. The court considers children's preferences, especially articulate, intelligent children like you two. That night, after the girls went to bed, Richard stood in the doorway of their room watching them sleep. Emma clutched her teddy bear, while Lily's hand stretched protectively toward her sister even in slumber. In that moment, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to keep his newfound family together. These girls had healed something in him he hadn't even realized was broken. He wouldn't let anyone take them away. The family court was hushed as Judge Winters reviewed the final documents before her. Richard sat with Lily and Emma on one side of the room, Catherine Newman and her attorney on the other. The woman's designer clothes and perfect manicure couldn't hide the calculating look in her eyes as she glanced at the girls. Before I announce my decision, Judge Winters said, I'd like to hear from Lily and Emma Blackwood. Lily stood first, her posture straight despite her nervousness. Your Honor, when our parents died, we lost everything. Not just them, but our sense of safety, our home, our identities. Her young voice carried clearly through the courtroom. Until we met Richard, we were just running and surviving. Emma joined her sister, small hand clutched in Lily's. Richard doesn't treat us like we're just money. He helps me with piano and listens when I talk about my mommy and daddy. He keeps their picture by my bed so I can say goodnight to them. Judge Winters nodded thoughtfully. And what about Ms. Newman? She is your blood relative. We've never met her before the hearing. Last week, Lily answered honestly. She never came to our parents' funeral. She never looked for us when we were living on the streets. Richard felt a surge of pride at their composure and clarity. Judge Winters turned to Catherine Newman. Ms. Newman, you've claimed a deep concern for your cousin's children, yet there's no evidence you attempted to contact them before their substantial inheritance was secured by the court. Newman shifted uncomfortably. I only recently learned of their situation. Despite the extensive national news coverage, Judge Winters raised an eyebrow. Richard held his breath as Judge Winters reviewed her notes one final time. It is the finding of this court that the best interests of Lily and Emma Blackwood will be served by granting full legal guardianship to Richard Montgomery, with adoption proceedings to follow. She looked directly at the girls. Your parents would be proud of your courage. Outside the courthouse, under a rare streak of Seattle sunshine, Emma launched herself into Richard's arms. We won. We get to stay together. Richard hugged her tightly, then extended an arm to include Lily, who joined the embrace without hesitation. Now we're really a family, Emma declared. We've been a family for a while now, Richard corrected gently. Today just makes it official. Later that afternoon, in the garden of what was now truly their home, Richard and the girls planted a young cherry tree. In memory of Charles and Victoria Blackwood, Richard said as Emma carefully patted soil around the sapling's base. So, they'll always be part of our new beginning. Lily, who had maintained her composure throughout the emotional day, finally allowed tears to fall. Thank you for not giving up on us, she whispered. Richard knelt beside her. Thank you for showing me what family really means. As the three of them stood together in the golden afternoon light, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a misguided attempt to save face at an ex's wedding had become the most meaningful chapter of his life. Family wasn't about blood or biology. It wasn't about what you couldn't have or what you'd lost. Family was about choosing each other every day, through difficulties and joy alike. It was about building something new from the broken pieces of the past. It was, quite simply, about love.